Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you holding this hearing. This is, I think, an extremely important issue. I think it's a tragedy that we've enticed our children to incur now about a $1.2 trillion in student loan debt collectively. I had a finance professor in college, before we ever talked about cost of capital and all the complex issues with corporate finance. He spent a day just talking about personal finance. He said, the reason they call a debt instrument a bond is because when you go into debt, you put yourself into bondage, and you want to really avoid that. So I certainly took that to heart. I, of course, had the advantage of growing up and going to college in the 70s when college was a whole lot cheaper, worked full-time, and rather than leaving college with close to $30,000 in debt, I actually left college with $7,000 in the bank. And so I wish that were more possible. I'd like to start with a chart that I've prepared, and I've actually been using this in my PowerPoint presentations as I travel around the state of Wisconsin, just laying out some facts and little food for thought here. And what this chart shows is that in 1963, the total cost of a four-year undergraduate degree in a public college was about $929 per year. That's room, board, and tuition. Now, by 1988, the actual cost had risen to $4,678, which was 27% higher than had it just grown at the rate of inflation. But you can see as of 2012, the cost of college outstripped the rate of inflation by almost 2.5 times. So rather than costing about $7,000, which is what it would have been if it just would have grown by the rate of inflation, 1 year of college now is about, in 2012, was $17,474. 2.5 times the rate of inflation. And I guess the question I'm asking is why? What is so different about what colleges and universities spend their money on that their costs would outstrip the rate of inflation by 2.5%? And by the way, two of the components, room and board, food and shelter, in the rest of the economy, not necessarily on college campuses, in the rest of the economy, those have actually grown at a lower rate than inflation because we've become so much more productive in those sectors of our economy. Obviously, productivity is not exactly a word we use in education, which is a real shame. So again, just kind of asking the question of why all of our good intentions, and let's face it, this is what we spent in college, or on college in terms of student aid, which is about $2 trillion since 1963, was all well-intentioned, but did it have a very serious negative unintended consequence. In other words, in trying to make college more accessible, did we actually make it less accessible because we've made it so much more unaffordable? And by the way, just to add a little more detail to that chart, of the $2 trillion we spent over that time frame, about $200 billion was spent between 1963 and 1988. $1.8 trillion was spent as college costs really skyrocketed and soared. Again, cause and effect, I'll leave that for the reader to judge. And I think Mr. Vetter is going to talk a little bit about that as well. Madam Chair, you are correct. It's a shame that in 2011, which is the latest figures I have from the College Board, average student loan debt after 4 years of college is $25,000. Of those, 57% of students that actually incur debt. In a private institution, it's about $29,900, and 65% of private college students incur debt. Another interesting statistic is how long it's taking our students to graduate. About half graduate pretty much in the 4-year time period. In other words, they graduate within 52 months, or about 4.3 years. But the other half raises the average time to graduate to 6.3 years. Again, just asking the question, why is that? Particularly when you have so many kids leaving high school with college credits in the bag. Have we made college funds available so readily that people can dither in college? Just a question I'm asking. Now, I know part of this hearing is to talk about other types of pieces of legislation to supposedly solve the problem. One thing I think it's important for us to talk about, though, is how those proposals might be scored. Currently, the CBO is constrained by having to score the cost of these college-age programs under the Federal Credit Reform Act. And under that scoring for the 10-year period 2015 to 2024, because it doesn't account really for varying economic conditions or loan defaults, it's actually showing that the student loan program saves the American taxpayer. In other words, reduce the deficit by $135 billion over 10 years. But if you use a fair value basis, if you actually account for tougher economic times, varying economic times, and defaults, it would also actually cost the federal government $88 billion over that 10-year frame, time frame. So I think it's important, if we're looking at a piece of legislation, we actually take a look at the fair value cost and the effect it has on the deficit. And then I think finally, the only thing I want to talk about is another potentially unintended consequences of some of these programs designed to forgive loans. In 2007, Congress passed into law the College Cost Reduction and Access Act of 2007. It established a new public service loan forgiveness program that discharges any remaining debt after 10 years of full-time employment in the public service. The borrower must have made 120 payments as part of the direct loan program in order to obtain this benefit. In other words, they have to keep their, they can't be in default over the 10-year period while they're working for the public sector. Now, Politico wrote a column on this and said that law schools looked at the new laws and saw an opportunity. Income-based monthly statements are lower than standard payments, so the schools could cover graduates' payments entirely for their first 10 years. The money for law school repayment assistance programs usually comes out of tuition mostly paid with federal student loans. You understand what I'm saying there? So the law school is gaming the system. They're saying, ooh, so all we have to do is we'll make the loan payments for our graduate students for 10 years, and at that point, the American taxpayer will pay for our law degrees. At Berkeley, for example, it's part of the fee that all professional degree students pay. At Georgetown, 350 borrowers are taking advantage of this program. At Berkeley, there are 263. By the way, the average student debt of a law graduate at Georgetown is $150,000. At Berkeley, it's $115,000. And the Wall Street Journal wrote about this too. It's not just Berkeley and Georgetown. Columbia University, University of Chicago is also doing that. And until recently, Georgetown had on its law school website basically talking about how the school's aid combined with the federal plan, quote, means public interest borrowers might not pay a single penny on their loans ever, exclamation point, end quote. A school spokesman said the statement was removed this year. So again, I understand that this $3.5 trillion a year entity called the federal government and the student loan program and all these aid packages are all well-intentioned programs. But I think we have to honestly take a look at the reality situation and look at the very severe and serious negative unintended consequences of our good intentions. Part of that being is we have collectively enticed our children to incur $1.2 trillion student loan debt that now we're trying to figure how to solve that problem that the government's caused. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thanks for coming to testify to all the witnesses. Did any either high school or college counselor ever go through the calculation of taking on student loan debt and how you'd be able to repay it based on the type of profession you were looking at?
They did not. Actually, when we started the conversations about college, they simply, let us know you can apply for millions of dollars in scholarships and grants. They're available. You just have to apply for them, and you can talk to your financial aid counselor about the other options for paying for college.
So did you ever talk to a financial aid counselor that talked about the ability to repay?
Not in the initial stages. They simply were saying you have this much of a balance, you can pay with it using this financial aid package of your subsidized or unsubsidized loans, and you can take them if you want, or you can borrow from your family. Do
you wish you would have had, like I had, a finance professor kind of talk about, in other words, if you could go back in time, would you do the same thing over again? Would you incur this much debt? Would you try and figure out maybe a different solution?
In my experience and for my profession, a college degree was absolutely necessary. There was not, the option to not get a degree was not available. So I would do it because ultimately my goal is to become a teacher.
Have you ever heard of the College of the Ozarks? They go by the moniker of Hard Work U. It's basically a college university set up where all the students work, and it's really set up so that nobody incurs debt. Does that sound like kind of a good idea to you? Would you like, again, to get a college degree? I agree with you. We're all talking about it's a great investment, but if it's a great investment, the amount of loans ought to match it, so you ought to be able to handle those when you get all done.
It should, and that's why I think being able to refinance the loans that we have would be a great benefit for students like me because the loans made it possible. There was no other funding available to go to school, and of course, we have to have our degrees to teach. You don't want an unqualified teacher in the room, and I don't see myself doing anything else. So whatever it takes to get to a classroom, that's what I will do. But I think we need to look at what we can do to make it possible for everybody to get the degree they want and not the loan debt to go along with it.
First of all, God bless you for being willing to teach our kids, and, we certainly all wish you the best of luck. Mr. Chopra, you said that student debt is hampering our economy, hampering entrepreneurship, hampering a lot of good stuff. How would shifting this debt from a select few to all of our kids and grandkids, how would that help our economy, help entrepreneurship? Because that's all we'd be doing here, right? It was really shifting the debt burden from those that incur the debt to all of our kids and grandkids, because we're already in deficit and we can't afford it, and it's just going to be piling additional debt on our kids and grandkids, correct?
To refinance a loan in other product markets, such as the mortgage market, when broader interest rate environments change, it is common, not only for homeowners, but also for the corporate sector as well as the government, to be able to match their debt to something that potentially reflects better their own broader interest rates, their credit profile.
Let me interrupt. Are you supportive of the, I'm trying to think, that act I was talking about, 2007 Act, that basically forgives student loan debt after 10 years of work in the public sector? Are you in favor of that?
We do not know the results of that yet. Nobody has actually received forgiveness from that program
Yeah, well,
yet.
but again, forgiveness will come on the backs of the American taxpayer or additional debt burden on our kids and grandkids, correct?
Well, that is Congress's decision about
I
how to
understand.
allocate.
I'm just asking, are you supportive of that program? And again, I'm going to your comment, how does that not hamper our economy, not hamper entrepreneurship if we shift a debt burden from a select few to all of our kids and grandkids? I'm just trying to point out what's actually happening here.
Well, the distribution of the debt burden, it will come in multiple different sectors, but I think the marginal propensity to consume for young people who are at prime ages of home ownership, who are at prime ages of purchases of durable goods, this is something that is of great worry to the financial sector, to a number of other industries.
But our debt burden's not, so there may be a higher propensity to spend in some sectors, but there will be a lower propensity because of the debt burden. Let me ask you, are you disturbed about the Politico and the Wall Street Journal stories I was reading about how the law school, graduate schools are gaming that program? Does that concern you? Because it sure concerns me.
There are, as we saw in the run-up to the financial crisis, the incentive misalignment between those who broker loans or offer loans and their alignment with investors or others can lead to very disastrous consequences. I don't know the specifics of the schools that you mentioned, but aligning incentives between schools, between financial services providers and others is critical to ensure that market outcomes are efficient.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.